I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hello, Brooklyn and beyond. Now we're going to pick up where we left off with Natasha Bowman.
Hi, I'm Natasha Bowman. I'm the founder of the Bowman Foundation for Workplace Equity and Mental Wellness. The mission of the Bowman Foundation is to cultivate cultures of mental wellness in the workplace and psychological safe workplaces in the U.S. and beyond. The reason I founded it is, like many other people across the globe, I suffered a mental health crisis during the COVID pandemic. As you know, every business was almost faltering, including mine. I had canceled all of my scheduled events, all of my trips, work trips, and my clients had paused all their contracts. And unfortunately, my brain did not know how to abstain from doing anything, and that caused a great amount of stress for me. Unfortunately, several months into the pandemic, I went deeper and deeper into a depression, and I attempted suicide and was hospitalized for 10 days in an inpatient mental health facility. As you can imagine, after that inpatient hospitalization, I had a great deal of self-stigma and wondered what was next for me. However, I chose to share my story publicly because I thought it was very important that a Black woman talked about being mental illness, as I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder while I was hospitalized. After I went public with my diagnosis, I received overwhelming responses from people all across the globe about their struggles with mental health, and specifically how their mental health was being affected by their workplace. That is why I founded the Bowman Foundation for Workplace Equity and Mental Wellness, so that we can stop toxic workplaces, create psychologically safe ones, and create healthy work environments for everyone across the globe.
Yeah, you're phenomenal, Tasha, and I love the information that you're sharing. And the one thing that I really gleaned from what you said was, you know, so much of this is self-love, being in touch with yourself. And we're talking about workplace equity and mental health. Talk to us about an article that I saw that you wrote around the pillars. Like, how do you keep your sanity and yourself sane at the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as we know, this is very turbulent times in workplaces across the globe. We looked at 40,000 layoffs just last week in an industry, in a sector that was generally known where you were pretty safe and secure. So everyone at this point is burned out. And I always wonder, if you lay off 40,000 people, who's doing those jobs? Because obviously they weren't sitting and doing nothing. So I worry just as much as the people that were, some people are not at full capacity. And I've been in HR where, you know, it's like, you know, this person really is doing half a job. But I've also witnessed where it has been for financial, and a whole person, FTE, work is put on another person. So we have to talk about how do we, in the article you read was, you know, how do we reclaim your mental health at work, you know? And that first thing was about boundaries. And I had no boundaries when I was in the workplace.
And you know, I had zero boundaries with work too. Work creeps into everything.
I was on the way to my father's funeral.
Yes,
in the
that
limo,
happens.
on my, at that time, dating myself, BlackBerry.
And you don't like that.
You know, returning emails, you know, so it's no boundaries.
How about nursing a baby?
No, nursing a baby,
it gets that real.
But most of us don't have boundaries, period.
Right.
If you look at if you look at our everyday lives, we do things for other people even if we don't want them. Even if we don't want to, right? We're not good at setting boundaries that will protect ourselves.
I'm not good at a lot of things, but I'm good at setting boundaries.
That's good. Yeah. That's good.
Does that come from you being a single
No, I didn't come out the box like this. Now, excuse me, you know, I, as a friend of mine, I paid a lot of money to get to this point.
Got it.
You know, I've had great therapists, I've had coaches, you know, life experiences.
That's what it takes, though. People need to know it takes a good therapist.
Therapy is a good thing.
Yes, it takes good things.
But it's not just therapy. It's also I've had great mentors and coaches in the business world. I've learned a lot from white men around boundaries. And I think it's important also to, in the context of talking about boundaries, there's a contract at work, right? You get a paycheck and there's something that you get in, because I think that in today's world, some folks are taking the boundaries and the mental health and the anxiety, I think, a little too far.
I found it really interesting that you said you learned boundaries from white men, because I really learned how to blur everything in the environment that I worked in.
Well, hold on. It's not that. It's not that black and white.
Oh yeah, certainly.
I mean,
right.
But I watched how, I'll never forget. Just when I was at Prudential. And I was having lunch with the chief financial officer. And I walked into his office to go for lunch. He was on the phone. He hung up and he chuckled. He said, "They're not very happy with me because I won't do what they want me to do. Are you ready for lunch?" Right? And what I took from that was, that's a boundary. He had, yes.
I hear that, but if I'm the boss,
that privilege.
Thank you, because that's a privilege. That's not a privilege.
Well, then is it
yeah.
both? I mean, so as black women, do we consider setting boundaries a privilege? Okay.
We do, and do we have the privilege to set boundaries?
Well, I think,
thank you. That's the issue.
But who gives you permission to set the boundary? If we're saying,
my employer does. The person to me. For me, it's kind of like the paycheck got something to do with boundaries. But I want to hear you. I want to hear you.
I disagree to that, because I think
an
effective working relationship is a little bit on the employer's part and a little on the employee's part.
That's right.
You do not want to put so much policies and procedures that regulate behavior that you're diminishing a person's sense of personal agency.
Right.
I hear you, but you know something? You can have a toxic boss.
Well,
you said effective. What did you said? You said effective. I think
we
that's
can't
key.
just put everything in the pot, right? So yes, toxic bosses, but let's, if you look at the bell-shaped curve, you have, the best bosses, you have the toxic, and then you have most people in between that are somewhere in between. And, I've worked in a lot of different places with a lot of different people. And, the toxic ones, you figure out how to do. But we're talking by and large, how do we help people to set boundaries?
So there's another, and so let's get back to that, because you wrote this article and you said just say no to additional work.
Yes.
All right.
And
How does that work?
Because as I reflected, going back to what you were saying, a lot of the pressure that I was on, I put upon myself.
Right.
And I had to reflect. Did my boss tell me to email from my father's, or did I feel an obligation to?
That's right.
So I had to, really weigh what are the actual expectations of my job, and then what were those additional expectations that I put upon myself.
Because we're black women.
Because we're black women.
That we got to hold on to that job. We got to do everything we can to keep that job. That is what is going on inside our heads.
And and so you have to just start saying no, which is very hard for me to do.
Yes.
That's something I'm still working on.
Right.
And I would take on so many things, and I would in my personal life and in my professional life. So saying no is okay. We've got to start saying no.
Yeah.
And having a conversation and not being insubordinate.
Right.
I'm not going to do this work. But let's have a conversation about that. You've asked me to do A, B, C, and D. I have this many hours in the day, and I'm not going beyond those hours. And I'm not saying to do I know what you're saying from a generational standpoint, where it's sometimes taken too far. Yeah. But I only have so many hours in the day. A, B, C. Let's talk about reprioritizing instead of just taking it all on.
And the other thing is to ask a question. What is the urgency? I mean, and I work with people on both sides of the fence. And I ask the executives, when do you need this? And they, it's not a rush, but nobody's asking that question.
Yeah, and I agree a lot to what you're saying, because another thing is that the workplace is changing. It is not the workplace where I was raised, where it was very directive. This is what you have to do. You go above and beyond. You really didn't ask as many questions. It developed that type of relationship with the employer. But this generation is different. The newer generation in particular, we're seeing higher attrition than ever. They're saying, listen, if it's toxic, I don't have to stay here.
No.
I can go someplace else where they respect me. And we have to be mindful of that as employers.
I agree with what you're saying, but I guess jobs are available. Meaning, and again, I'm coming from that old mindset of this is the job, you better do what your boss says, because, people like us sometimes don't get hired as quickly. We can be out of work for 2 years looking for a job where somebody, all of those kinds of messages are going on. But you know what? But this is going to lead us to yet another conversation around remote work, right? Now, is it working?
Yes and no.
Okay, let's talk about the no.
Well, the no. One of the main things that concerns me for remote work, especially for Black people, is what we call proximity bias.
Yes.
Because you talked about white men. White men helped to propel my career, and I was in corporate America. In terms of they were saying my name, they were sponsors. They were saying my names in rooms, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
And I was promoted to C-suite at a very young age, et cetera, because of that. However, being the extroverted person that I am, I have no problem approaching people.
Right.
When I worked at Walmart, for instance, I would see the CEO in the cafeteria. I made sure that he knew my name, knew what I did, and what my aspirations were. Like, oh, and can you have lunch?
Yes.
So, but if you take that away, being in the remote work, we lose that very pertinent interpersonal relationships that, as we know to this day, this has not changed. That when you're looking to have upward mobility,
you need it.
That relationship is part of it. I don't care if you're, busting off your KPIs and your goals and all of that. You've got to have a strong relationship with the people that matter.
That make decisions.
Working remotely, that proximity bias, that's going to create inequities.
So how do we combat that though? If we're working remotely and we've got the proximity bias, what do people do? Figure out that they need to go get into work every now and then? Meaning, what would be the strategies?
I've been putting it on the managers. So as I work with organizations, and that's strictly what I do now. I came out of the workplace. I work with managers to help them to continue those relationships with their remote workers. And then I also, if I have focus groups with employees, I help them to strategize with checking with that man. Like, don't just have a one-on-one just to talk about your job, your goals. Have that interpersonal relationship. Have a happy hour after work or whatever work hours. But find that way to connect. Find that way to ensure that you understand what's going on in the organization, that you're committed to it, you're loyal. Ask questions outside of the scope of your job. Show that you're committed. But I think it's going to be it's going to continue to be. That's why we're seeing more people that are more so for us. More so for us. But at the same time, coming home has also been a safe space for Black people.
I had a friend who said I would still be working if I could have done it remote because the people in the office I didn't particularly get along with.
Right. So it's all about relationships. Those relationships actually help to propel your career, or they diminish it. It's all about that. It's all about the culture, right? Even when it comes to mental health, I talk about that all the time. It's not about yoga. It's not about mental health days. It's not all those things that organizations think that it is. It's about your culture.
Right?
It is.
Can I ask you, one of the challenges that I had, and I worked all through the pandemic. I work in education, so we didn't stop. We switched modes, right? One of the problems and challenges I had, coming back to the boundaries, was setting the boundaries if I was working at home. I didn't have the space to have a separate office, so everything was contained in my bedroom with the desk and the computer, and then there's the room. So I found myself working at all different times of day and night, and where everything just got blurred.
In fact, studies have shown that people are taking less and less PTO and sick time, not because it's not being offered, but because, well, I'm sick, but I could just work from bed. I won't be on camera, but I'm working.
It's like no more snow days.
Yeah, no more snow days. Yeah, exactly, for the students.
Right.
Like, let the kids go play out in the snow. It's still snow. But I have, done Zoom trainings and things, and people like, oh, sorry, I'm not on camera. I have COVID. I'm like, well, do you feel good? Like, why are you on this? I'm just not going to be on camera. No, you need to rest your body. So you're exactly right. That line is being blurred. For people like me, that works. I love it because I love working all day and like, I'll stop and do this with my kid or stop and, I have a movie going, I have all these types of things going. But I am being more intentional about shutting it down and doing things for myself. But we've got to worry about those blurred lines. But we got to go, I'm sorry, just one thing, going back to what you said earlier, you can't have one to many.
Right.
meaning one policy
Right,
or
you
approach
just
to
spoke about
things to many people.
You just
We've got
said
to
that.
allow people to define
Right.
what mental wellness, what a healthy work environment looks like to them. So some people,
equity.
which is equity. So when you have organizations say, "Oh, mental health Fridays," that's great, but maybe Friday isn't the day that I need off. Maybe I need that mental health day, but Tuesday's that day because my daughter has cheerleading or whatever it may be. So we need to let people define. I work in a very different way maybe than what you work. The way that I, so again, I had a mental health crisis because work was taken away from me. A lot of people discover things, working out, doing all those things. I hadn't worked out, not on when. Maybe I should have found that. But people found what that meant to them in a different way. So we've got to let people, not let organizations define for us what mental wellness is. They've got to be flexible.
I agree. I think we were talking about it, this whole concept of one size fits all. And first of all, I'm a plus size woman, so one size does not fit all. Concept. But just really moving it now to the workplace. Really true to what you're saying. One size does not fit all. It's about being able to listen to what the employee needs. That's what I'm finding. But that's also our struggle as managers. So I have a question to pose. So is the training that managers are getting today, really helping them to kind of deal with this type of change, not looking at an employee as a whole bunch of employees, but really an individual employee.
And then
what
how
do
do
we
you
need
do
to do a
that?
little bit different?
I think it's too soon to tell because I've only started my work in May of last year. I haven't had a chance yet to, and I do an organizational culture assessment beforehand so that a year later we can do it again. So I haven't had that measured result yet, but I think it's resonating, and I'm finding that managers are being more vulnerable to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm a leader, but I'm a person too. And these things that my team are experiencing in terms of these things that are happening in their homes and their, in different in the environment, it's actually affecting me too. And so I try to put it in that way so they can see it through their own lens, and shift their perspective. Don't look at it as, oh, I'm doing this for my team. What if this was you? What would you need for support, right? Or your wife or your child. Look at it that way, very personalize it. And that's the way we've been approaching it. And again, I'm waiting to see what that result is. I'm very weary even with this new call to action or, for workplace wellness, because again, it can be performative, just like the anti-racism work that we saw. So it can be performative. In fact, we're seeing it. In fact, remember when Elon Musk took over Twitter, he's like, no more mental health days.
Complete toxic.
No more mental health. We're starting to see stuff like that. Okay, everybody, come back to the office 5 days a week. We're going to start seeing these things rolled back. So that's why it's important, going back to that article, that we take and what we've been talking about. We've got to reclaim our own mental health. No, number one, our job is a temporary situation.
I want to get, I hear you. I want to get to the whole remote piece and why one would advocate for it.
Oh, I'm a big advocate.
Yeah, I want to hear.
I love it. So, and a lot of it depends upon the type of job. Not all jobs are remote friendly. And not all people are remote friendly. Okay, they don't work well in remote situations. But I work for a company where I would say 95% of my workforce is working remotely. And they just have to rotate in like every 5 to 6 weeks into the office. And we only do that because of business continuity purposes, to make sure that our business, if something goes down. But it is working well. And when you ask employees, they love it. It is the employers that are struggling with it. They love it. So I guess my question is, how do we deal with the gap of effectiveness, like this gap where employees feel like this is great, they feel they're more productive, but managers' perception is that they're not.
And the fact
because you can't see them.
But the data, that's the only reason.
You can't see them working.
That's the only reason. The data has shown that productivity, just like you just said, has increased. People are working around the clock because they are working remotely. It's the proximity. If I don't see you, it's the trust issue.
It's the trust.
Wait, I would add something else.
Okay.
Because what I find and it's in organizations and with leaders across the board, they don't define the outcomes and expectations clearly enough.
I think
so
that's
the
very
target,
true. Yes.
The target is fuzzy, so they don't know, and I think
What
that
success
it's
is.
also impacting the employees. Of course, they love it because they don't have to go in and all these things. And if I'm working around the clock, which we're saying don't do that, how do I know that I'm productive?
What success looks like.
What does success look like? And I ask that question with all of my clients, and it's not an easy answer.
And I bet you they couldn't answer it before remote work either.
No, they couldn't. They couldn't.
That's very true.
So
That's
it
very
has
true.
nothing to do with remote work.
Exactly.
Now,
So
but
a lot of it, a lot of it is a call to action from government officials.
Right.
Because they want business continuity for the mom and pop
community.
shops at, the community, because, hey, if I don't have this big building of people,
It has an
they're not
economic
going to
impact.
Starbucks, they're not going to this place, they're not going to that place. So a lot of it has been driven by driving the economy,
Yes.
right? Which
Right.
I want that
Right.
as well. So we've got to find a balance, right?
And the thing is, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap. But I wanted to give you a chance to just pitch both of the books that we see here today. Okay?
Yeah, so this book is You Can't Do That at Work.
That's a good one. I wish I had that book when I was working.
Yes, 100 legal mistakes that managers make in the workplace. I'm actually a labor and employment law attorney by trade, turned HR. And that's still relevant. Hadn't been too many changes in employment law since 2017. This is The Power of One, Leading with Civility, Candor, and Courage, based on a TED Talk that I did in 2018. I want to bring civility back into the workplace, kindness, all the things that you said that you talked about.
Yeah.
And I've got a third book coming out during Mental Health Awareness Month, Crazy AF. But the AF is and fearless.
Okay.
How to go from being burned out, unmotivated, and unhappy at work to reclaiming your mental health at work.
Well, I'm going to say this has been wonderful chatting with you. I'm going to get you back on.
All right, let's do it.
You're going to go back on Brooklyn Savvy.
All
So
right.
thank you so much,
Thank you for
Natasha
having
Bowman,
me.
and thank you for just enlightening us so much.
thank you.
And Christina Suji, we're going to see you again, but thank you as well. Okay, thank you. And we will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.